Good afternoon. I know this is a little bit later than usual. Busy day. And right after this, I go to pick up this 7-year-old from camp. So, Parshat Matot-Masei. The year is 5784 still. And this is called the presence, Presence, and presents, Presents, of women. We begin our double Parsha with the text relating to vows and provisos concerning women making them. As we will be looking at what happens when values in the hierarchy come into conflict with each other, let us consider what is going on here. Men make vows just like they offer sacrifices, and that's taken as one and done. For women, it is rather different. But let us take care in attempting to discern why. So we begin. Moshe speaks to the heads of the tribes of the children of Israel and says, Zeh davar asher tzivah Hashem. This is what God commanded. Ish ki yidur neder l'Hashem o hishavah shavua l'asur isar al nafsho lo yichal davar divaro kechol hayotze mipiv yaseh. V'isha ki tidur neder l'Hashem v'asru isar. A man makes a vow to God, or makes an oath to prohibit himself, and that's it. He should not violate his word. According to what came out of his mouth, that's what he should do. But the woman who makes a vow to God, or imposes a prohibition upon herself while in her father's house, in her youth, if her father hears her vow or her prohibition, which she has prohibited upon herself, and he remains silent, the vow stands. If he protests, he can annul it. If she is betrothed to a man with her vows upon herself or by utterance of her lips, and her husband hears it but remains silent, her vows should stand. But if her husband hinders her from achieving her vow, he has revoked the vow that she has taken upon herself and the utterance she has uttered, and God will forgive her. As for the vow of a widow or a divorced woman, whatever she prohibits upon herself will remain upon herself. And we learn this in Masechet Kedushin, the very first chapter, which talks about the ways that a woman in that culture at that time would gain agency to oneself. And one was if it was clear that she was a widow, and another one if she was divorced and received her get. And only then can she be given agency for herself and not dependent on a husband, on her father, or what have you, assuming that it's a full-grown woman and not a child. Because remember, children were promised or were vowed to be given to others at very, very early ages. If she vows in her husband's house or imposes a prohibition upon herself with an oath, and her husband hears and remains silent, then her vows should stand. So Rashi explains as follows. What does it mean if one prevented her from fulfilling her vow? In other words, revoking it. So he wouldn't understand what this term, hana'ah, which is usually used, hana'ah has to do with enjoyment or getting benefit from or what have you, means. But it says if her husband hinders her on the day he heard it, it has revoked it, meaning that hana'ah means revocation. So maybe it's like other words where used in a different context can mean the absolute opposite, like v'hinachem, which we've talked about, and God is comforted or God is discomforted. It can mean both opposites given the context of what goes on. So notice that in this scenario, a man's vow stands and a woman's vow is conditional upon a variety of elements. Looking carefully at this, we may find a hint at contextual understanding of responsibility. Remember, unlike our times, the framework of our Tanakh times and its explanation at this point, women did not generally have the agency over themselves that we in the Western world assume, have, value, hope isn't taken away, whatever. But here they can and do have agency to make vows. But what happens if their husband or father is supposed to protect them at all costs, is not silent and revokes their vow. Maybe it's not in her best interest. Maybe, again, looking at the context, women didn't go out to the market generally. They weren't outside. It was very unusual. They were inside. They were protected. They needed to be for all kinds of reasons that we've discussed and are very well known if you look at the historical development of women and women's rights. So what's going on here? According to the Sefer Matot, this is to protect the woman who may not have all of the necessary information one would need in order to make such a vow. However, as we saw with the Sota and other instances, the system depends on the honorable intentions of those involved, here, the husband or the father. In other words, not to harm her or to restrict her or to negate her intentions, but to be able, having a bigger picture of what's going on in the world due to just their access to that world, to be able to protect her. After this, we read of disappointments, land distributions, conflicts, circumstances of war, and final instructions in a variety of circumstances in our double portion. We end the double portion of the book of BaMidbar with chapter 36. And this is the second instance I want to speak about. Vows, and now we're going to talk about going back to the B'not Zelophachad, whom we learned about in Parshat Pinchas, and the modifications in the law that were made and spelled out due to their request. In other words, we begin this double portion with concerns about women and their vows and having all the information, and it ends with concerns about women and property and preserving their rights and their position in the community. So we read in chapter 36. The paternal heads of the family of the sons of Gilad, the sons of Machir, the sons of Menashe, and the families of the sons of Yosef, approached and came to Moshe and before the chieftains and the paternal heads of the children of Israel. They said, "The Lord commanded my master to give the land as an inheritance through lot to the children of Israel. And our master was commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of Zelophachad, our brother, to his daughters." In other words, are we checking in? Is this to the law? Does this apply to all of us? Is this just a one-time deal? Or does this have ramifications in terms of law? Now, if they marry a member of another tribe of the children of Israel, their inheritance will be diminished from the inheritance of our father. In other words, the tribal units were the ones that controlled the land and that had the land. And the idea was to maintain the land within the tribe. Think of a family that has a generational home as an inheritance. The elders of the family die or leave or whatever, and somehow that home has to be distributed evenly amongst the children. Do you sell it and distribute the money? Do you give it to one child at the expense of the others? How do you maintain some sense of just distribution here? So that's what they're worried about. It will be added to the inheritance of the tribe. Why? Because a son, a male who marries a female, inherits her, and the son's pedigree follows the father's tribe. This was the patriarchal setup of the society. Even when the children of Israel will have a jubilee, their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry. Their inheritance will be diminished from the inheritance of our father's tribe. So they're concerned that when the B'not Zelophachad go to marry, it's fine to indicate that they get the inheritance of our father's land. But when they go to marry, it will be lost to the tribal unit, the kind of Uber family, if you will. Moshe then commands the children of Israel according to the word of God, saying, you know what? Kain mateh b'nei Yosef devarim. The tribe of Yosef has spoken. Their devarim are correct. Their words are correct. They have spoken justly. So this is what God's going to command regarding Zelophachad's daughters. Let them marry whoever they please, but they must marry only into the family of their father's tribe. By the way, that was a normative practice to begin with, so it's not like those of you that are thinking, oh no, that means I can only marry the people in my neighborhood. I can't go somewhere else for college. I can't. No. Again, society was much more fixed than that. It was much more closed than that. It was much more generationally defined than what we are familiar with. When they marry only into the family of their father's tribe, therefore, we will do both. The inheritance of the children of Israel will not be transferred from tribe to tribe, and each person from the children of Israel will remain attached to the inheritance of their father's tribe. So in other words, they will be maintaining the land of the integrity of their tribe. Every daughter from the tribes of the children of Israel who inherit property shall marry a member of her father's tribe, so that each one of the children, their nachalat mateh, the inherited property of their tribe, will be protected. So here, the daughters are equal to the sons in maintaining their family and the Yerusha. Therefore, they have the added responsibility of ensuring their family's continued bequeathed holdings. This is another example of where privilege and responsibility come together, and they work together in a synchronized manner. You can't claim privilege without also understanding the responsibility. Every daughter who inherits their property, it's because Dafka, there was not a son born to her father. And no inheritance will go from tribe to tribe for each person of Israel. And again, this goes back to the distribution of land in the beginning, will maintain their inheritance, their tribe. And the context of this, the underlying, codicil, if you will, is that if the daughters of Zelophachad are so concerned about maintaining the property of their father's Yerusha, then they also want to maintain the integrity of the tribal unit and its collective Yerusha. Again, remember, people did not go on vacation to ancient Rome and meet somebody and leave. Very, very different society, very, very different pool of marriage candidates, if you want to look at it that way. So God commands Moshe, and this is what Zelophachad's daughters did. And we name them again. We named them twice in Parshat Pinchas, and they are named a third time here. Machla, Tirza, Hogla, Milka, Noah. They married their cousins. They're stated here according to seniority, the oldest first, right? And they were married in the order in which they were born. But in other places, some of our Mefarshim say, it also lists them in order of their intelligence and informs us that they were all equal in such. So they married into the families of the sons of Manasseh, the sons of Yosef, and their inheritance remains in the tribe of their father's family. And then it ends with Elah mitzvot hamishpatim asher tzivah Hashem b'yad Moshe el b'nei Yisrael ba'arvat Moav el Yordan Yericho. These are the commandments and the ordinances that God commanded the children of Israel through Moshe in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Yericho. I find it highly noteworthy that this is the last discussion in Sefer BaMidbar. And it's about the named daughters of Zelophachad as the protectors of their own family inheritance. As Dr. David Burnett in the Torah.com explains, the end of the book of Numbers of BaMidbar seems to neatly wrap up the desert wandering portion of Israel's sacred saga by presenting a travel log, chapters 33, verses 1 through 49, that from a geographic vantage point constitutes a summary of everything that transpired from the 12th chapter of Shemot onward. Then the text sets up the people for entry into Canaan by laying out the land's boundaries and enumerating the tribal leaders and their allotted holdings. The Levites are dealt with individually as they do not receive a standard tribal area, but are granted 48 cities, including the 6 cities of refuge for perpetrators of accidental manslaughter. These cities' functions and attendant rules are laid out, and the chapter then finishes with a pronouncement about the ideological and theological implications of murder. Having already eschewed the tidy narrative closure that was in the offing, the text then throws us a literary breaking ball. Chapter 36, the last chapter of Numbers, after all this is neatly tied up, picks up on the tale of the daughters of Zelophachad, which was ostensibly laid to rest in BaMidbar chapter 27. For at least a millennium, readers have asked and answered why the Torah sundered the B'not Zelophachad account and ends the whole book of Numbers with its reprise, ostensibly unconnected to what preceded in the narrative order. I would like to add a new proposal to this exegetical catalog by looking at the text within the framework of what ethicists and legal theorists term values hierarchy. Namely, when a society attempts to put a system of ethics or practice into operation, they can encounter a collision of mutually exclusive values. Here, maintaining of the land, maintaining of the inheritance of individuals, and the fact that the Zelophachad has no daughters. How do we hold on to his land? How do we uphold one ethic or ritual, and how do we not achieve or lapse into abrogation of another? The society is then forced to choose and prioritize. This prioritization results in a values hierarchy, which when in place allows the society to adjudicate cases when similar values are in tension. So here the values conflict between patriarchal control and land holdings confronts us. The land wins out and does so in the merit of Zelophachad's named daughters. Our Haftarah from Yirmiyahu Parak Bet begins as such. Shim'u devar Hashem bet Yaakov v'chol mishpachot bet Yisrael. Listen to the word of God, house of Jacob, and all the families of Israel. God says, what wrong did your forefathers find that they distanced them from me, and they went after futility, and they did not say, where is the Lord who brought us up from Egypt? I brought you to this land to eat of its produce. Where did the priests say, why did they say, where is the Lord? Therefore I will contend with you, says God, and with your children's children I will contend. L'chen ad ariv itachem ne'um Hashem ve'et b'nei b'nechem ariv. Now, what are we talking about here? We must note that the male-dominant language of this text is clear. This seems to take us back to the troubles and contention of Sefer BaMidbar, going against the grain of the neatly wrapped-up dynamic indicated above in this double Parsha. What do we learn from this? I would like to propose two of many lessons. One, I think that it is a myth to think that our lives are ever neatly wrapped up. That as one problem is resolved, another one pops up. Much like the metaphor of the carpet that can never be laid just right with no areas in which there needs to be adjustments. Two, there are different modes of leadership and advocacy. I would suggest that we see many differences between male and female dynamics here and elsewhere in our Tanakh regarding these stylistic variations. Let's return to that concept of our values hierarchy. Patriarchy, land, rights of women, inclusion of all people, protection of freedoms hard won long ago and threatened today for so many are all elements in our daily reality today. You'd think, been there, done that, but here we are again. Sometimes, guys, it's just too much for me. At this time of so much discord and pain, I checked in on the happiest countries in the world. For those of you that have ever looked at this list, I want to tell you, and this was taken in December when the war was already going on, Israel is number 5. And 8 of the top 10 are all Scandinavian area countries, with the only other country that is not so being Australia at number 10. What I find of most worthy and particular note is that of the top 3 countries, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland, all have women as presidents or heads of state. Of the top 10, 2 other countries also have women in their top leadership positions. While clearly a very small minority of countries can claim such leadership, it is most curious that those countries with women at the helm are so disproportionately represented at the top of this list of countries with the most satisfied populations. I find it most fascinating that for our text, namely the Torah and the Tanakh, where too many claim there is not enough talk about women or credit accorded to them, which, by the way, I don't always agree with as being the case. For these last two Parshot of Sefer BaMidbar, women are very much present. As an inclusio, between which we get that catalog and that travel log that I mentioned, we have women taking vows and we have women maintaining land. Two stories about female agency at a time when that was not what we would want it to be necessarily. These women make vows that are binding and hold land that belongs to their families. They approach their leaders with respect and regard, specifically asking for what they need, and are rewarded with positive results. These negotiations are not land grabs, nor are they promises that do harm to others. They are not thoughtless promises in the case of vows. Rather, here we are dealing with intentionality and the hopes of achieving noble and correct goals. It is significant to note that in both cases, the speech of women is what is involved as that which moves us forward. As Rebbetzin Tehila Jager claims, speech is a port of entry into the world for the complex thoughts and feelings inherent to feminine wisdom. This wisdom is produced through an internal partnership between intuition and intellect, unique to each individual. In order to be understood by others, it requires verbal translation through the mechanism of speech. Women are innately connected to the spoken word. According to the Gemara, 10 measures of speech descended to the world, and women took 9 measures of speech. Thus, a Jewish woman has the potential to be a great communicator. Her capability may be a source of either fulfillment or frustration, depending on how it is cultivated. Improperly used, such a gift of speech deteriorates into gossip and other unproductive or abusive talk. Because speech is so potent, the Jewish woman needs constantly to work on refining what she says, as well as how and when she says it. A Jewish woman's power of communication aligns her with God, who God's self constructed and sustains the cosmos through speech. We are told, by the word of Hashem, the heavens were made, in Tehillim chapter 33, and with 10 utterances the world was created, ethics of our fathers. Inasmuch as the Torah tells us to emulate God's ways, the significance of speech and God's creation implies that our own speech holds enormous creative possibilities and potential. Let us remember, when others claim an absence of women and their stories and influence, for those of us who are looking and paying attention, clearly women are very present in the annals of our history, regardlessly of the amount of attention we accord them. Whether it is our imahot who are barren and then give birth, Devorah, who provided such critical advice to all those under her tree, basically it was her office, her outside office, Zelophachad's daughters, Shifra and Puah, the midwives, and so many others, there is a unique type of leadership provided by women. By our very presence, we can provide presence to all, be it through promises made, injustices articulated, or resolutions found and land maintained. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Let us be strong. Let us be strong. Let us convey that strength to others. And I wish all a Shabbat Shalom. Lehitraat.